Hi, everyone. Welcome to the FY 2024 Non-Capital Grants Workshop. My name is Heather Barrett. I'm the Administrator of Architectural Research here at the Trust, and I co-administer the non-capital program with Chief Archaeologist Matt McKnight. Today's agenda includes an introduction to the program, a discussion on project eligibility, the nitty-gritty of budget and grantee contribution, online application tips, selection criteria and process, and grant administration. There'll be 3 of us speaking today. So today's handouts include the non-capital grant guidelines and manual, a sample intent to apply form, and the sample application. All of those documents are available on our website. The intent to apply and the application must be submitted through our online grants system. So to give you a brief overview of the program, the non-capital program is designed for research, survey, planning, and educational activities involving architectural, archaeological, and cultural resources of the state of Maryland. The available funding for this year is at $300,000 and has been distributed to MHT from the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority Financing Fund. Eligible applicants include nonprofit organizations, and that does include state and federal agencies, as well as local jurisdictions. Nonprofits must be registered with SSTAT and in good standing. Nonprofits also need a letter from the IRS documenting their status. Local governments must match the grant 1-to-1 in cash or in-kind services. It can be any combination thereof. There are no set percentages to each of those categories. There's no match required for nonprofit organizations, but obviously supplying some sort of contribution enhances your application. This is a competitive grant program. Eligible activities include architectural and archaeological survey work, National Register nominations, HSRs, thematic research that supports the development of historic contexts, preservation plans, and then a variety of other education and outreach activities. A long list of eligible activities can be found again in those grant guidelines and manual. For FY24, we have some special funding priorities. We've had these focused on research and survey over the last several years. So we're looking for broad-based, comprehensive, and systematic archaeological or architectural surveys, projects designed to assess, document, or address the impacts of natural disasters and ongoing natural processes on our cultural resources. Projects that undertake detailed, in-depth study of a specific topic, site, time period, property type, or theme. We do not fund projects that involved capital expenditures, so no brick and mortar projects. We do have other grant programs at MHT that fund those types of activities. The non-capital program does not fund the development of exhibits from existing museum collections, nor projects that seek to conserve or catalog historic archival collections. This does not apply to artifacts, which I'll get to in a little bit. We do not fund publications previously completed, manuscripts, projects that are already underway. We do have a set of program requirements. Again, these can be found in our grants guidelines and manual, but to give you an overview, some of the requirements include any architectural or archaeological research or survey project must be consistent with MHT's standards and guidelines. You see both of these documents here. They're available on our website for each discipline. Personnel performing architectural and archaeological work must meet the minimum requirements of the Secretary of the Interior's professional qualification standards. That's 36 CFR 61. You are able to identify consultants within your grant application. Another way of hiring personnel would be the RFP process. Some other requirements include for any archaeological investigation that results in the recovery of artifacts, the application must state where and how those artifacts will be conserved and stored. Please consider curation at the MAC Lab in St. Leonard, Maryland. For projects involving only one resource, that resource must be listed in the National Register of Historic Places or determined eligible for listing by MHT's director. For projects with GIS or spatial data development, the grantee must provide copies of all the databases and image files to MHT at the end of the project. So where do you begin? You read through you read through those documents that I've mentioned, the grant guidelines and manual. There's a quick start guide as well on our website. You'll be creating a username and password so you can access the online application. Identify application items that need the longest lead times. Perhaps that's support letters. But then create a schedule for yourself so that you know you can get everything done before the deadline. Don't forget there's an attachments tab that you need to be aware of on the application. It's often overlooked. So how do you start developing your project, and what kinds of questions should you be thinking about? What kind of project are you undertaking? What is the scope of the project, the entire project from start to finish? Is it a multi-county, multi-jurisdictional project? What is the entire project's cost? Are there other funding sources or resources available that can complement your application? Should the project be broken down into phases? Will your organization have the capacity to manage the grant? Some of the categories on the application, the sections of the application include the project budget, project description, that's the scope of work, that includes your overview and methodology. Those two sections are probably the most important sections to focus on. There's a section for timeline, your significance and need. There's a selection of project focus, so you'll be selecting one of these three categories, and then a section on project management. So some additional details to think about when you're preparing that application. Again, the scope of work, what's in, what's not included within your project. And when you're thinking of that scope of work, make sure that you're really specific. So you want to call out the details with some specificity. What can you reasonably accomplish within the given 2-year grant period? And think about your timeline should consider the project starting kind of at the award, the grant award, all the way up to draft deliverables, and then to final deliverables. Build in time for MHT to review products as well. Both of the grant funds and your contributed funds must be spent on the project within that time period. What are your goals for the project? What do you hope to achieve? So when you're thinking about filling out this budget spreadsheet, we have a maximum request of $75,000. And when you're thinking about this chart or spreadsheet, you should each of these categories should be reflected in your application. So you want to be able to detail what you're spending your grant funds on, what your match and contribution are going to. So make sure that's really articulated in your application and then reflected on the budget spreadsheet. All expenditures and match should be accounted for. And then for nonprofits, you are able to include up to 10% for indirect costs. That's similar to operating costs. There is a section in the guidelines that explains that in more detail. And so some of the costs that we do not fund include legal and appraisal fees, insurance premiums, food and beverage costs for events, state staff time or funds, payment to any MHT staff or Board of Trustees member, and then costs incurred or work accomplished prior to approval. The expected approval date for this grant round will be November of 2023. Keep in mind that once that award is announced, there's probably about 6 months before a grant agreement is fully executed. So build that into your timeline. Again, we've talked a little bit about this. So just as a reminder, local governments must match the grant 1-to-1, no contributions for nonprofits. And there aren't any required. It is not necessary to propose a contribution in excess of the 1-to-1. It won't improve your score. And in fact, it makes your life and our lives a little bit more complicated. Tips for a successful grant application. Be convincing about the significance and urgency of the project. We've had some applicants put non-applicable for significance. Don't do that. Tell us why your project is important, why you should accomplish it this year. Know what expertise the project requires and assemble a strong project team. Show us your commitment and knowledge about the project. So for example, you might need a team that includes a landscape historian, an architectural historian, an archaeologist. Know who is needed to complete all of your scope. Review and understand our selection criteria. Address them in your application. This is how we rank applicants. Be clear and concise in all your responses. Make it easy for us. If we're asking too many questions about your application, probably won't bode too well for your project. Propose a project that falls within that special priority areas that we've articulated. And in the grant process, in the review process, these projects do receive a bit of a bump in scoring. Know how your project relates to local and state planning goals. So here you see the Preserve Maryland 2 statewide preservation plan. We're beginning a new process for the next 5 years or so, but this present plan is posted on our website. And then finally, cultivate support for your project. Develop relationships with the community, with local, state, and federal representatives, and other preservation organizations that may share a similar goal. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison Lutheran, our Architectural Survey Administrator, to go over some online tips. Thank you.
Hello. Now I will be discussing the online grant application process. If you go to the Maryland Historical Trust's grant webpage, you can scroll down to the bottom and find the link to the Historic Preservation Non-Capital Grant Program to the left in green. Once on the non-capital grant webpage, you will find a lot of useful information about the program. The resource panel on the left includes guidance documents, such as the grant guidelines and manual, a sample application form, and an application quick start guide. The application is a two-stage process. It begins first with an intent to apply form. Begin by clicking the My Grant Account button on the non-capital grants page. You will then be prompted to either sign in to an existing account that you have from a previous MHT grant, or create a new account if you have never applied for a grant with MHT before. The ITA is a short, basic questionnaire that asks about your proposed project. Submission of the ITA is due June 30th, 2023. The second stage is the full application. You can begin once it has been released to your online account. Make sure to log in using your same credentials as you did before. The application is a longer form with multiple pages or tabs. Submission of the full application is due August 1st, 2023. If you do need to create an online account, click the New Applicant link at the bottom of the sign-in page. Enter your email address and create a password. When working on the intent to apply, you have the option to save a draft and finish later. Saving the ITA will return you to the My Account screen. You will receive an email reminder that you have saved but not submitted your ITA. Once you have completed your intent to apply and filled in all required fields, click the Review button. If you have missed any required fields or uploads, they will be identified in red. You will not be able to see the Submit button until all of the required fields have been completed. If you have missing information, update the required fields, then click the Update button on the Review My Application page. After the ITA is submitted, you will receive a confirmation email. When you are ready to begin the full application form, you will need to log back into your online account. Once in your online account, select the application you want to begin or continue working on. Always log into your account from the My Grant Account button to avoid creating a new application form each time you log in. Select the application you want to begin or continue working on. Navigate between sections by clicking on the tabs at the top of the page. Clicking Next will take you to the next tab and save your work. The red asterisk means a response or upload is required. The word counter will count as you type. Clicking the check mark to the right of the field will check spelling. The application can't be submitted without all required responses and required uploads. If you are unclear about the meaning of a question, you can click the I or info box, and a pop-up window will open up with additional guidance. After 45 minutes of inactivity, the grant application system will time out. This pop-up will appear to give you notice of timeout. It is important to save frequently as you fill out the application. Your work will not save automatically if the system times out. As a tip, you may wish to compose long text responses in a word processing document first, then copy and paste into your application as a safeguard against losing work. The application will require that you upload documents. Click Choose File and navigate to the file you want to upload. When you have selected a file, the file name will appear on the right, then click Upload. Click Remove if you accidentally uploaded the wrong document. Please do not upload individual image files. Instead, combine all of your images and captions into one Microsoft Word or PDF document, which can then be a single upload. Please note that saving the application returns you to the My Account screen and does not actually submit the application. When you have just saved the application, you may receive a reminder email that you have not actually submitted yet. Once you have completed the application, filled in all required fields, and uploaded all required documents, click the Review button on the Attachments page, or simply click the Review My Applications tab. If you have missed any fields or required uploads, they will be identified in red. You will not be able to see a Submit button until all errors have been corrected. If you have missing information, update the required fields, then click the Update button on the Review My Application page. When you are satisfied with your application and completed all required fields, click Submit. You must complete the application and click the Submit button by the final submission deadline of 11:59 p.m. on August 1st, 2023. If you don't submit by that time, you will not be able to submit at all. The system does not allow late applications. You will not be able to submit an application unless all required fields are filled in and all required documents are uploaded. Once you have submitted an application, you will not be able to make any changes. You will, however, still be able to view it by selecting Submitted Applications from the drop-down menu. After submission, you will receive a confirmation email that the application was received. We will contact you if we have any questions. And finally, here I just have some tips for completing the application. Make sure that all required attachments are uploaded and finish all required responses. You can't submit without this. Submit a complete application by 11:59 p.m. on August 1st, 2023. Do not wait until the last minute. Double check math, spelling, and grammar. Fortunately, the online application has functions to help you with this. If you have problems with the online application, contact myself or Heather Barrett for architecture projects and Matt McKnight for archaeology by phone or email.
Hi, my name is Matt McKnight, and I am the Chief Archaeologist here at the Maryland Historical Trust. I'm going to be covering the remaining slides that talk about the selection criteria, the selection process, and grant administration should you be successful and receive a grant from us. So the grant selection process. Grant applications, again, must be submitted online by 11:59 p.m. on Monday, August 1st, 2023. And unfortunately, late applications cannot be accepted. Also, you should be aware that we will not be present here at MHT offices at 11:59 p.m. And so we really encourage our applicants to try and actually get their applications submitted prior to that, get them submitted earlier so that if you run into some sort of glitch or last minute technical problem or have any sort of issues at all, there's still time for us to be able to assist you and help you get your application in by the deadline. So again, we cannot accept anything late after you've submitted your application. So what are the steps in the process once we have your application? Initially, MHT is going to conduct a threshold review of the applications just to make sure that the tasks that are outlined in the proposals are actually things that we can pay for with non-capital funds and that they're actually non-capital tasks. So we will look at your type of organization as well to determine whether or not it actually fits into one of the categories that was outlined earlier for you in the slide presentation, so that we know everybody's eligible, the tasks that they're proposing are eligible, and we can move forward. Then a select group of staff will review the applications. Those staff are selected based on their disciplines that they are experts in, and they will evaluate and rank and recommend the actual funding levels for your grant. So do be aware that those funding levels can differ from what you have initially requested. So keep that in mind when you're putting your proposals together. The MHT Board of Trustees will then review the recommendations that the staff has made, and if they concur with those at the board meeting they usually hold in October, then the recommendations will move forward to the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Planning. The secretary is the individual that ultimately approves the recommendations that have gone forward. And if everything goes according to plan, we anticipate that the award letters for the FY24 Historic Preservation Non-Capital Grant Round process are going to be awarded in November. They'll be sent out in November of 2023. All right, so next we will talk about grant selection criteria. First and foremost within that is the overall significance of the project. So what architectural, archaeological, or cultural significance to the nation, the state, or the local community does the affected resource possess? Then we look at urgency. So you need to explain in your application how the architectural, archaeological, or cultural resource is imminently endangered, whether that be by development, pressure, erosion, neglect, age. In the case of an oral history project, that could be the illness or the age of the folks that you want to interview, or you can explain if there is some unique window of opportunity for completion of the project. So, for example, if you're dealing with an architectural resource that is having repairs made to it, and there is suddenly parts of the building that are exposed and aren't normally exposed, that would obviously facilitate documentation, and so you need to explain that in the urgency section of the application. Project design. There we're looking at, are the project goals realistic within the proposed time frame and budget, and will the project provide a complete product given what you've put forward in the budget? Protective value. There we're looking for you to explain how the proposed project contributes to the long-term preservation, conservation, or documentation of the architectural, archaeological, or cultural resources, or to Maryland's heritage overall. And how does the project provide concrete action to protect, conserve, and document those resources? If there's educational outreach value to the project, please explain it and how permanent and far-reaching is that educational component. Innovation value, there we're looking for, does the project utilize methods or technologies that are transferable for statewide, regional, or local applications? So will the project have the potential to sort of serve as a model for future research? Next, we have project impact. So is the project intended to stimulate or prompt other architectural, archaeological, or cultural resource preservation and conservation, documentation, or educational projects, or programs throughout the community that will support professional preservation? And is there local government support for the project that falls under that category as well? Next, we look at professional and administrative capability. So for professional capability, what we're looking at is, do the project personnel have the necessary training and education as well as experience to carry out all the specific goals that you've outlined for us? And similar to that, what's the administrative capability of your organization as a whole? What's it look like? Is there a proven track record for the personnel? Do they have a record of successfully administrating grant monies? Those could be either MHT projects or other grant programs that you've participated in. So tell us a little bit about your past history with grants, and you need to show basically that you can successfully administer grants, meet project deadlines, and follow all the established procedures that are in that grant guidelines document that was mentioned earlier. Project readiness is whether or not the project can begin on schedule, and will other contributed funds, which we used to call match, will those contributed funds be on hand when they are needed? So contributed funds, as previously mentioned, not all applicants are required to provide some sort of match, but even if you are not required to provide that, contributing resources, at least some funds or other in-kind support, does offer you some additional points in the project grading scheme. So for these types of grants, does the sponsoring organization provide any independent support for their project, and how much cash or in-kind support is actually being offered by the sponsor? We also look at equitable geographic distribution as determined by MHT staff. So we do really try hard to make sure that non-capital grant funds are being distributed throughout the state as much as possible. In order to ensure that, we look back at our previous awards. We look at U.S. Census data, the National Register listings, to try and see how equitable past grant funds have been distributed and how your project will either improve on that situation or not. And finally, there are those FY 2024 special priorities, which you heard mentioned and discussed earlier. And here they are back on the screen, just in case you need to see them again. So the prioritized projects include broad-based, comprehensive, and systematic archaeological architectural survey to identify and document previously unknown, little studied, or threatened resources. Projects designed to assess, document, or address the impacts of natural disasters and ongoing natural processes on cultural resources, and projects that undertake detailed, in-depth study of a specific topic, time period, property type, or theme. All right, so now we're going to go over the grant administration schedule, and I've put the intent to apply deadline as well as the completed application deadline back up on the top of the slide there one more time for you, just in case you've missed it. The remaining dates that are listed on this slide are approximate, so we expect grant awards to be announced sometime in November of 2023. Once you get those award letters, then MHT will work from November of 23 up through early spring of 2024 to get the grant agreements drafted and through our legal department, and then mailed out to you for your signature. Then once they're signed and fully executed, there's essentially 2 years to complete the project that you describe in your grant application. So that places the deadlines for most projects to be completed that folks would be applying for this year. It places that deadline roughly around May of 2026. What is the grant agreement? The grant agreement is the contract between you as the grantee and MHT as the grantor. The grant agreement is going to include a description of the scope of work, which is itself going to include a list of all your deliverables, so all the things that you basically promised to do as a part of the grant, and a timeline for delivery of those. Sometimes we have to change the description slightly from what you maybe put in your application to kind of put it into a standardized legal language format. So do make sure that you read those grant agreements carefully when they come in. Your grant agreement will also include an itemized budget, including not only the grant amount, but also any additional contributed support from the project, whether cash funds that you've promised to provide or in-kind support. So bear in mind that, well, when you promise to make a match or to contribute support, that you are then going to have to eventually document that you have met those promises. So whether it be in kind or cash, what we don't want is for you to overpromise at the application stage and then under deliver later on. And then finally, the expiration date is also going to be listed in the grant agreement, and that will no longer than 2 years from the date of your signature under normal circumstances. So once you have a grant agreement in place, how do you go about having work approved? Generally, we encourage our grantees to set up a project launch meeting or at least to coordinate with your grant monitor in order to get the project fully underway and make sure that everybody is totally on the same page. For archaeological projects, we typically require quarterly progress reports because the possibility of unanticipated finds in archaeology, we really like to be kept abreast of exactly what's going on at all stages of the project. And the quarterly progress reports are a good way for us to sort of all be in the same place as the project progresses. Generally, for non-capital grants, there will be draft deadlines and final report submittal deadlines in the grant agreement. So you'll want to pay attention to that and to make sure that you meet those deadlines. If there are significant MHT comments on draft materials, sometimes we might require a second review before final submittal takes place. In addition to the draft and final deadlines for the report, there's often draft and final deadlines for MIHP forms, whether those are MIHP architectural forms or MIHP archaeology forms. So we're going to require drafts to be reviewed first and then final versions submitted. One of the questions we always get is, how do grant disbursements work after I get the grant money? How do I actually get the money? Typically, a small percentage of grant funds are dispersed upfront as sort of startup costs, and then beyond that, additional disbursements are made as the project progresses based, number one, on the submission of satisfactory products. So that could be Maryland Inventory of Historic Property forms coming in, archaeological progress reports coming in, draft reports coming in. As long as you're meeting your project deadlines and then you submit a request for payment, what we now call the certification of expenses form, we can go ahead and start processing that to get you paid. Payments are only made to the grantees and not to contractors or consultants or other people that you hire who are working for you on the project. So we pay you, the grantee, only, and then you in turn certify that you have expended those funds for these contractors and consultants and that they are paid directly by you. Then we reimburse you. Typically, we are able to process those certification of expenses forms within about 30 days after the submission of satisfactory requests for payment. And in addition, in anticipation of folks' next question, yes, we can disperse grant funds to you before you pay the contractor or the consultant's invoice. That's a change from a few years ago. We can do that. It's now allowed under these grants, but you will need to consult with us before doing so. Next, how is the expense documentation handled? This is what our certification of expenses form looks like. In the past, where grantees had to actually submit receipts and invoices to MHT as proof that you had paid a subcontractor or consultant, now what we have is this form where you sign essentially certifying that what your expenses have been, and then it's your responsibility to maintain the invoices and keep the receipts as supporting documentations for those costs. So what we do now is we take a random sample of grantees that are selected each fiscal year to provide that documentation to MHT to show that you have in fact spent the grant funds according to what you had proposed. Your organization needs to retain copies of all the financial documentation, that the invoices, the receipts, the payments, all those things, all the individual balances in the account for these grants. All those things, you need to maintain them for a period of 5 years beyond the termination date of your grant. So that would normally be about 7 years from the time you may have initially started it. So you need to keep those things in order that you had to close your grant out. We take a look at the certification of expenses form, and then we pull some grantees at random. And each fiscal year, we're going to ask that the number of grantees to provide this financial documentation. So in addition to the possibility of being selected for MHT spot checking, you also need to comply with all federal, state, and local financial documentation that's required. So be aware of that as well. So how does the procurement process work? If you hire a consultant or you need to put together a team, how do you go about doing that? In our grant program, basically, our program guidelines, there's 3 different ways that consultants or teams can be identified. You can do that in the grant application itself. So if you've actually put your team together at the application stage and you list everyone in there, that's you're basically sort of getting pre-approval at an early stage so that we can then just finalize those details as appropriate in the grant agreement. Contract sourcing criteria can alternatively follow the procurement processes of your organization, and that's provided that you send those policies to your grant monitor beforehand so that they can take a look at them and approve them. And then finally, if it doesn't fall into one of those 2 procurement categories, consultants or subcontractors should be procured through a competitive bidding process where you do a traditional request for proposals, RFPs, and then you have people respond to that. So the final section of this presentation, we're going to go over some of the past projects that we've had in the historic preservation and non-capital grant program as a way to kind of get your creative juices flowing a little bit and get you thinking about possibilities and how you may want to put together your grant application. The first one that I've highlighted here is one that made the news several years ago. You probably saw it in the Washington Post and other newspapers. And that is an FY18 non-capital project that was actually funded by MHT, where the historic St. Mary's City contacted and contracted with Dr. Tim Horsley to conduct geophysical remote sensing survey of a couple of parcels on their property there. And based on the results of that, the 1634 fort established by the first colonists of Maryland was discovered in the mill field. So the geophysical anomalies that were identified there were ground truth by Dr. Travis Parno, and it proved that it indeed was the fort, but it was actually originally funded by a historic preservation non-capital grant for MHT all the way back in FY18. The Baltimore Architecture Foundation project, documenting early women architects in Maryland. This is a multi-year project that was first awarded funds in FY21, and then they came back to us in subsequent years, and they got a second award last year. This grant has resulted in multiple property documentation form on early women architects, as well as 1 individual nomination for the Hirsch House, which was designed by Poldy Hirsch. Additional women architect designed properties will also be recommended in this second phase that's ongoing right now. In FY21, MHT funded a project by Texas A&M University to investigate, document, and digitally visualize a statewide cross-section of buildings that are associated with enslaved Africans. These are all resources that are at risk from development, environmental change, and neglect. And the project is nearing completion. It's produced investigative reports, digital photographs, measured drawings, and 3D digital models. In FY21, the Catholic University of America was awarded a grant to use a combination of remote sensing and traditional archaeological excavation work to document how the Jesuits in both Southern Maryland and on the Eastern Shore organized their plantation landscape. So they looked at 3 sites: Bohemia Manor, Newtown Manor, and St. Inigos. And basically what the project looked at was the interrelationship of free and enslaved spaces, and there was participation on behalf of descendant communities in both the consultation process and doing field work. And a final report is currently under review by MHT. This University of Maryland, Southern Maryland Tobacco Barn Survey and Documentation Project, this FY22 project, was awarded to the University of Maryland to conduct a survey of tobacco barns that date before around 1870 in Southern Maryland. These types of resources are highly endangered due to functional obsolescence and development pressures in the region. And Maryland Inventory of Historic Property forms and final survey reports are currently being produced by the students at Maryland. An FY22 grant that is currently underway is the St. Mary's College of Maryland, Tracing Piscataway History on the Ground. There's a lot of field work that's being conducted as a part of this project. They're using archaeological survey on several properties, state, federal, and privately owned properties that are known to be associated with the Piscataway peoples of Maryland's Western Shore. So survey work in St. Mary's, Charles, and Prince George's County is documenting these important Native American resources and is producing new and updated MIHP archaeology site forms. So with that, we want to wish everyone good luck in the preparation of your application. If you have specific questions following this presentation or you need help with your online grant application, you can reach out to the individuals that are listed here on the slide. If your question is related to standing structure or architectural research projects, you'll want to speak to either Heather Barrett or Allison Lutheran. But if the question is related to archaeology project, you can either get in touch with myself or state terrestrial archaeologist, Dr. Zachary Singer. So with that, thank you everyone for your attention and good luck.